Alcatraz was arguably the most formidable prison in the history of the United States. Isolated on an island in the heart of San Francisco Bay, surrounded by frigid waters and a formidable security presence. It housed the most dangerous criminals, notorious bank robbers, and persistent system disruptors, including, for instance, the legendary Al Capone. It was considered impossible to escape from here. During the prison's nearly 30 years of existence, there were 14 escape attempts. Officially, all of these were unsuccessful. However, unofficially, one of them did achieve its objective, which, despite having occurred almost 70 years ago, is still shrouded in mystery. Hello everyone, you're watching the channel based on real events. My name is Mikhailo Stak. And today, I'll tell you about an escape that shattered the myth of America's most secure prison of the last century. It became the basis for the 1979 film Escape from Alcatraz, starring Clint Eastwood. These events also partially echo The Shawshank Redemption, despite both films being based on completely different stories. In this video, I will tell you how the prisoners managed to bypass the security system, which was considered perfect, and why even today, more than 60 years later, this case has not been closed. Alcatraz is a small yet sinister island, located in San Francisco Bay, right next to the famous Golden Gate Bridge. The prisoners could literally see freedom on the horizon, a city teeming with life, but they had no chance of reaching it. Like a stone shattering glass, it shattered the prisoners' minds. The island is truly small, just 500 meters long and 180 meters wide. Admit it, there's barely any room to escape, or even just move around. Initially, Alcatraz was intended as a defensive sea fort, and for a time, it even served precisely this function due to its strategic location. No wonder the prison later earned the nickname The Rock, although it seems so impregnable. During the Civil War in the United States, captured Confederates were held on the island. Its isolation, cold and swift currents, and steep cliffs made the island ideal for confinement. In 1867, they actively began constructing a prison here. While initially it could hold only 20 people, by the end of the 19th century, its capacity had grown to 450. In the 1930s, the prison underwent modernization. This was the most expensive prison reconstruction in the history of the United States. And by 1934, the most dangerous criminals from the entire federal system began to be brought here. Bank robbers, murderers, organizers of armed attacks, and so on. At that time, the country was suffering from the consequences of Prohibition and the Great Depression, so the wave of crime significantly intensified. So, Alcatraz became a symbol of punishment, and at the same time, a powerful means of intimidation. And it truly worked. Throughout America, legends were told about Alcatraz. Just the mention of its name made inmates in other prisons become much more obedient. This location became iconic not just because of its extreme isolation, but also due to the notable individuals imprisoned within its walls. Among the most famous inmates were Al Capone himself, George Machine Gun Kelly, and Robert Stroud, a convicted murderer, who was later known as the Birdman of Alcatraz. Surprisingly, he earned this particular nickname because during his previous incarceration, he caught, cared for, and even sold birds. At Leavenworth Prison, Stroud was even provided with cages, feed, books, and other materials so he could pursue his favorite activity. At that very time, Stroud's collection had grown quite extensively. He wrote 2 books that were published and became very popular with readers. But let's return to Alcatraz, to its security and the sheer reliability of this exceptionally strict penal institution. For example, there was 1 guard assigned for every 3 prisoners. This was truly an unprecedented level of control. The cells were small, mostly solitary, and that created additional psychological pressure. The lives of prisoners in such harsh conditions are quite realistically portrayed in the feature films Escape from Alcatraz and The Shawshank Redemption, to which we will return later. Yet despite all of this, some of the inmates actually perceived certain advantages even within this hellish environment. For instance, a few of them claimed that, when compared to other correctional facilities, Alcatraz wasn't quite as dreadful as one might imagine. At least the food was good there. And it wasn't by chance. The administration understood that even the smallest creature comforts could lessen the chance of riots and escapes, which threatened almost every American prison back then. Another fact that set Alcatraz apart from other penitentiaries was the opportunity to work. While in most incarceration facilities labor was compulsory, here, quite the opposite. Work was regarded as a privilege, and one of the most severe punishments was to be deprived of it. Just imagine eating, sleeping, using the bathroom, spending almost all your time in a cramped cell and absolutely nothing else. From the outside, it might even seem quite comfortable. But when days, months, or even years pass by in complete inactivity, life transforms into a monotonous gray existence. People lost their minds, condemned to an endless, unchanging routine. That's why among prisoners there were cases of suicide or intentional self-harm, just to escape these walls. Although by the late 1930s in the United States there was talk about the need for prisoner rehabilitation rather than just their punishment, Alcatraz still remained the most severe institution in the entire country. Its engineering design also greatly contributed to this. The cell blocks were designed so that none of their walls directly touched the main structure of the fort building itself. This made it impossible to drill a hole through which one could escape, at least theoretically. But as practice showed, no walls can stop those who possess enough intelligence, motivation, and sheer patience. This was famously confirmed by a man named Frank Morris, who is, in fact, the main character of the film Escape from Alcatraz. Frank Morris's life was never an easy one from the very beginning. He was orphaned when he was just 11 years old, and by the age of 13, he was first put behind bars. From that point on, his path led him almost without interruption through various correctional institutions. Despite such an extensive and significant criminal record, Frank was considered a remarkably intelligent offender. According to some reports, his IQ level was over 130 points, a score comparable to Stephen Hawking and Bill Gates. Therefore, very few scientists can actually boast such an impressive intellectual achievement. But his talent went in the wrong direction. If this mind had been applied to something constructive, the world might have known Frank Morris in a different way. But instead, drug possession, armed robberies, and most notably, an uncanny ability to escape custody. In January of 1960, after yet another successful escape from a prison in the state of Louisiana, the authorities finally decided they had to stop the criminal. Therefore, Morris was sent to the most secure prison in the entire country, Alcatraz. However, the moment Frank set foot on the island, he immediately started looking for a way to escape. The movie even shows how the main character first tries to convince himself that escape is impossible. And this truly captures the overall atmosphere, as Alcatraz's administration actively worked to make every single prisoner believe escaping from this place was nothing but an illusion. The prison director knew perfectly well the kind of inmates he was dealing with. Sharing a cell block with Morris were John and Clarence Anglin, brothers convicted of bank robbery, and Alan West, who had arrived at Alcatraz back in 1957. As it happened, all four knew each other from other prisons, and this acquaintance became a real opportunity. This close proximity allowed them to calmly discuss their escape plans, at least during the nights, which became a significant loophole in the prison's security system. It's important to note that neither Morris nor the Anglin brothers were murderers. They certainly had a criminal past, but at the same time, they were known for their exceptional cleverness. Specifically, the brothers, during their robberies, typically targeted businesses that were already closed, thereby ensuring that no one would be injured. They even claimed that they only used a weapon once during a bank robbery, and that particular weapon was merely a toy pistol. So it's no wonder they quickly found common ground with Morris. This gave birth to a plan that would soon be legendary. Frank himself became the mastermind of this escape. Over several months, the men gradually chipped away at the concrete around the ventilation shaft, located beneath the sink in their cell. Due to high humidity and salt, the concrete was brittle. This particular escape method, incidentally, strongly brings to mind the movie The Shawshank Redemption. However, in that film, the main protagonist required several years to excavate a tunnel to his freedom. Morris and his companions, however, needed significantly less time for this. They not only conceived their own escape plan, but also gathered a whole arsenal of makeshift tools for its execution. Metal spoons stolen from the mess hall, old saw blades, and even crafted a homemade hand drill from a vacuum cleaner motor. So, literally from trash, they put together an engineering solution. Gradually, centimeter by centimeter, they managed to dig a passage into the technical corridor, and paradoxically, this passage was completely unguarded. This was yet another enormous loophole in the system which the escapees skillfully exploited. It's important to note that all eating utensils within the prison were under strict control. After every single meal, guards meticulously counted each spoon, fork, and knife to prevent their potential use as weapons. Yet, despite these stringent measures, the four somehow managed to covertly steal some of the cutlery. And already at this stage, it becomes clear that the level of the plan's thoughtfulness was quite impressive. According to the prison's internal rules, inmates with good behavior were allowed to order personal items. Frank Morris took advantage of this opportunity and ordered an accordion, but certainly not for entertainment. The instrument was needed to mask the noise of drilling. Every day, playing the accordion for other prisoners, Frank effectively created a sound screen. At this time, his accomplices, the Anglin brothers and Alan West, were actively chipping away at the concrete and making their way to freedom. But this was just the beginning. Once the hole in the wall became large enough to crawl through, the men set up a secret workshop. And not just anywhere, but in the upper cell block, essentially in the prison's attic. This place was inconspicuous and well suited for their work. The prisoners concealed traces of their tampering with the cell structure using painted cardboard made to resemble a wall. It turned out so realistic that the guards didn't even suspect the deception. And this brings to mind an obvious parallel with the film The Shawshank Redemption, where the main character hid his excavated passage behind a poster of a girl. In their hidden workshop, they were working on the most crucial part of their plan. The improvised rubber raft measured approximately 2 by 4 meters. They even added life vests to it. All of them crafted from more than 50 raincoats, which were issued to prisoners without much record keeping. This very material became an unexpected resource, which they utilized to its full potential. And to effectively glue the rubber pieces together, they warmed them using the steam pipes of the prison's heating system. The idea, once again, is strikingly creative, and for inflating the raft, they ingeniously used a harmonica, which they skillfully converted into a hand-operated air pump, and the oars were meticulously cut from pieces of plywood that they had found amongst the building site debris. But, as they built their path to freedom, another problem arose: how to hide their absence from their cells during night checks. And this was extremely difficult. Even going to the toilet, prisoners were literally in plain sight. But even here, the men showed remarkable ingenuity. Using soap, toothpaste, and toilet paper, the prisoners crafted realistic papier-mâché replicas of their own heads. To imbue these models with a convincing sense of realism, they even painted them in a natural flesh tone using paint that they had managed to steal. And for the hair, they carefully utilized genuine strands collected from the floor of the prison's barbershop. During the nighttime hours, when the active phase of their escape commenced, the men would leave these fabricated heads upon their pillows right beside their makeshift bodies, which were cleverly crafted from towels, clothing, and blankets. In the semi-darkness, such figures looked quite convincing and could easily have deceived a guard during a quick inspection. All of this was shown in great detail in the film Escape from Alcatraz. This film is largely based on reliable historical details, and that's why it's hard to call it a simple adaptation. It's almost a documentary reconstruction. There's another interesting point that very few people know about. In prisons of that time, there was a written rule among inmates. If you learned of someone's escape, you had to help, even if you weren't planning to escape yourself. This is exactly what happened on this occasion. One of the prisoners, who worked as a cleaner in the prison block, upon learning of the escape, decided to offer his assistance. He approached the security guards with a rather persuasive request. He claimed that from the upper technical level, situated directly above the cells, dust was continually falling, making it difficult to maintain cleanliness within the unit. And to everyone's surprise, the administration actually agreed to cover this area with blankets. This seemingly small step held immense significance. Now, a makeshift canopy appeared above the heads of guards and prisoners, where the 4 conspirators worked. For an entire month, they could freely leave their cells, move through the pipes, reach the workshop, and prepare their escape equipment. And all this practically in the very heart of the prison, right under the guards' noses. While one part of the team was busy working on the gear, the raft, life vests, and oars, the others focused on the main objective, finding a real way out. After all, simply creating the necessary equipment is only half the battle. The most important thing was to actually escape from the prison that for many decades had been considered absolutely impregnable. Ultimately, they managed to discover this particular path. Scrambling up the drainage pipes, using them just like a set of stairs, the conspirators eventually made their way to the ventilation window, which was situated high up, almost right beneath the ceiling, at a height of approximately 9 meters. They managed to break it out, and in its place, they temporarily secured a bolt made of soap. So, on the night of June 11th, 1962, the plan was ready for execution. Morris and the Anglin brothers placed dummy heads in their beds, carefully covering them with blankets. This made it appear as though the prisoners were soundly asleep, while they, one by one, stealthily crawled through the openings they had made in their cell walls. However, one of the conspirators, Alan West, found himself unable to escape in time. His meticulously carved hole in the wall proved to be too narrow, and it required him a significant amount of extra time to successfully widen the opening. However, when he finally managed to get himself out, the escape was already well underway, so he merely stepped onto the roof, stood there for a little while, breathed in the fresh air of freedom, and with a heavy heart, he was compelled to return back inside. And meanwhile, Frank Morris and the Anglin brothers made their way up to the prison roof, then slipped right past the observation tower carrying an inflatable raft, descended down the exterior drain pipe, and crossed the inner courtyard. And then they overcame 2 high barbed wire fences, each measuring about 3.5 meters wide, and eventually slid down a steep embankment to the island's northeast coast. There, by the water, they inflated a raft and disappeared into the darkness of the night. No one had ever managed to get this far before them. This was the first escape, where the inmates managed not only to break out of the facility, but also to abandon the island itself. By way of comparison, back in 1946, a different group of inmates also attempted an escape, but their approach was far more brutal. They took several guards hostage and then tried to make their way to the main exit. However, they broke the keys to the doors, and ultimately, the prison guards eliminated all 3 of them. So, that particular escape attempt ended in a very bloody fashion. But in the case of Morris and the Anglin brothers, things turned out to be completely different. Their plan was meticulously thought out, down to the smallest detail. However, beyond their intellect, luck undoubtedly played a crucial role, because even the most perfect plan could be thwarted by the slightest external factor. The alarm in the prison was not raised until the morning of June 12th. And then, a curious, yet truly chilling moment took place. When the guard approached Frank Morris's bed to wake him up, he saw a head that appeared incredibly realistic. So much so that his very first thought was that one of the prisoners had murdered Morris and then left a severed head upon the pillow. And in just a moment, the guard realized that it was a dummish. The prison was immediately put on an emergency lockdown. A massive full-scale search began. Every single room was checked, even the guards' quarters. As a result, a fake wall was discovered in Alan West's prison cell. He was quickly isolated and he agreed to cooperate. In exchange for a promise not to add to his sentence for the escape attempt, West revealed everything about the plan, the route, and the equipment. According to West, it became known that the escapees had absolutely no intention of sailing to San Francisco. Morris believed that it was far too risky. Instead, they planned to reach Angel Island and from there, steal a car and then set off for South America. However, as the FBI later stated, during the specified period, no instances of car theft were recorded in the region. At the same time, immediately after West's testimony, a massive operation to find the fugitives began. Hundreds of guards searched the island, the coast, and the surrounding waters. The army, helicopters, boats, and the Coast Guard were even involved in the search. Only 2 days later, search teams discovered the first trace of the fugitives, a single oar which the prisoners could have potentially used. On that very same day, a rubber-sealed package was located, most probably belonging to the Anglin brothers. Inside it were personal effects, among them a wallet containing the addresses of their relatives. And then, just 7 days later, the ocean waves washed ashore the remnants of a makeshift raft, not far from the very same Golden Gate Bridge. But the escapees themselves, alive or dead, were never found. So based on this, the FBI and prison guards declared that the escapees had drowned during their escape attempt. They claimed no one could swim across that bay. However, just a few months after Morris and the brothers escaped, an incident occurred that disproved this statement from the guards. Another prisoner, John Scott, who worked in the kitchen, was inspired by the escapees' success. He managed to cut through the window bars and jump into the water. Unlike Morris and the brothers, he had no flotation devices. He simply swam, moving his arms and legs like a professional swimmer, and even managed to reach the shore near the Golden Gate Bridge. However, he was found there in a semi-conscious state. He simply didn't possess the strength to carry on. So, this particular incident served as further evidence supporting the idea that Morris and the Anglin brothers' escape might have actually succeeded, and perhaps they didn't drown, contrary to what the authorities initially believed. This version became so incredibly legendary that debates about its truthfulness are still ongoing even to this day. It is important to note that Alcatraz prison was permanently shut down in 1963, only 1 year after the escape of Morris and the Anglin brothers. Formerly, it was attributed to the prison's progressive deterioration and the prohibitively high expenses associated with its maintenance. However, there was significantly more behind this particular decision than mere financial considerations alone. Alcatraz had, for a considerable time, been a constant target of criticism due to its extremely harsh regime, the profound psychological isolation it imposed, and its truly oppressive living conditions. Furthermore, the entire prison structure was in dire need of a complete and extensive capital renovation. Its value at that time was estimated at $5 million, a sum that is considerable even by today's standards, let alone back then. Although funds were formally allocated, engineers, after conducting an assessment, concluded that spending them would be futile. The building structure itself was outdated, dilapidated, and did not meet modern requirements for holding prisoners. the renovations could have turned into a bottomless money pit. Incidentally, there had been attempts to close Alcatraz much earlier. As far back as 1939, the then Attorney General of the United States, Frank Murphy, explicitly stated that the institution fostered a cruel and aggressive psychology among its prisoners. And the official 1959 report indicated that maintaining a single prisoner in Alcatraz cost taxpayers 3 times more than in any other prison in the country. $10 a day versus 3. So the 1962 escape became the final but decisive argument. If they managed to escape from a prison, once deemed the world's most secure, its reputation was ruined. So if there's no absolute guarantee, there's no point in keeping it. As for the fugitives themselves, though no bodies were ever found, in 1979 they were officially declared deceased. The FBI closed the case and handed it over to the U.S. Marshal Service. It was during that period, inspired by this very story, that Hollywood made the film Escape from Alcatraz starring Clint Eastwood. However, the final chapter of this story had not yet been written. Over the years, evidence would occasionally emerge, claiming that someone somewhere had seen the Anglin brothers or Frank Morris himself. The brothers' relatives even asserted that they received anonymous greeting cards for the holidays. Whether these were truly genuine is difficult to say. It is entirely possible that the film's widespread popularity encouraged individuals to make such statements primarily to draw attention to themselves. For instance, it was asserted that the mother of the Anglin brothers consistently received anonymous flowers each Mother's Day right up until the time of her passing in 1973, and it was also reported that 2 exceptionally tall, rather unusual women wearing heavy makeup were observed attending her funeral. Some claimed the fugitives had been sighted in Brazil, while others suggested accomplices picked them up by boat that very night. There were countless theories, but not a single one was ever officially confirmed. However, the story of their escape unexpectedly found a continuation in the 21st century. In 2011, a National Geographic documentary claimed that, contrary to the official FBI report, several other interesting details existed. According to the presented material, the escapees' homemade raft was later indeed found on Angel Island. This was precisely where the escapees had planned to reach, and subsequently, more information about a stolen car also surfaced. In 2018, San Francisco police discovered a mysterious letter that had been sent back in 2013. Its author identified himself as John Anglin, one of the 3 escapees. The letter read, "I escaped from Alcatraz in June of 1962. Yes, we all managed to make it out that night, but it wasn't easy." At the same time, the letter indicated that after their escape, all 3 individuals had been living in hiding. The author further stated that Frank Morris had died in October of the year 2005 and his brother Clarence in 2008. John himself, it was claimed, is still alive, but gravely ill with cancer, and wishes to negotiate his surrender in exchange for medical assistance. The FBI did conduct an expert analysis, but they were unable to definitively confirm or refute the letter's authenticity. And though the case is no longer considered a criminal matter, it still remains officially open with the United States Marshal Service. And in 2022, this story once again found itself in the headlines. The Marshal Service released computer-generated images showing how the vanished inmates might appear today. Furthermore, the public was urged to report any information that could finally solve this mystery. And finally, in 2003, the hosts of the popular show Mythbusters decided to check if that escape could truly have been made. They recreated the situation, used a raft of the same size, the same oars, and similar weather conditions, and proved escaping Alcatraz was indeed possible. Difficult, risky, but possible. So, did Frank Morris and the Anglin brothers manage to pull it off? And did they live to old age somewhere far away under false names, keeping the secret for life? This question still remains without a definitive answer.